We are paying so much more for aviation insurance these days. Let's find out why in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong.
And I'm Dan Milliken. In the Hangar is sponsored by Colton Mortgage. If you need a home mortgage or a refi, these guys will actually answer the phone and answer your questions. And we're sponsored by Flying Eyes. They make great sunglasses, but now they also make the awesome ophthalmics, regular glasses for people like me.
They look great on you.
Yeah, people like me that need glasses. So, all right. Christy, there's been a lot of heat going on in the aviation community as all of us have seen our insurance rates just skyrocket.
I'm feeling it.
Yeah, so we have a great guest today, so why don't you introduce him?
All right, with us today is Chad Smolik. He's a local aviation insurance expert. Chad, it's so nice to see you.
Chad,
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we get the pitchforks out and you know and the torches and go after you, what is the state of insurance these days?
Difficult.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I guess the biggest cause is losses.
Okay.
So anytime the insurance companies are not profitable, then they are not wanting more business. So then they're going to get a lot more selective on the business they do receive. And you have heard that aviation community is a small world. Well, when you get into aviation insurance, it's a smaller world. So if you're going to insure your car, your home, how many companies do you have to choose from?
Yeah, quite a few.
Oh gosh, so many.
20, 30, I don't know.
Thousands of them, actually. So now when we get into the world of aviation insurance, there are 20 companies for the entire aviation industry for insurance, including the airlines.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I didn't realize it was that small.
Very small.
Okay, so what you're saying is people just need to stop crashing airplanes and then our rates will go down?
Well, so the Boeing loss hit our market for about $2 billion.
Wait a second. How does Boeing and their loss affect me and my Warrior?
And we're talking about the 737 MAX?
Exactly.
Okay.
So again, small world, 20 companies to work with in the whole aviation insurance world. So aviation insurance, similar to other insurance, these companies, they buy this thing called reinsurance. So what they do is they, in essence, buy an insurance policy on their own book of business so one catastrophic loss can't take down the whole company. So there's only a few of those. So when that $2 billion loss goes through the reinsurance market and all the insurance companies have to buy reinsurance, it affects everybody. But we can't just blame it on the big boys, because what happens then is in your airplane, now you're down to about a dozen carriers for your Warrior.
Oh my, so we just went from 20 to 12, just like that.
Wow. And what is the most expensive kind of insurance?
Well, the most expensive insurance is the coverage you have that you're paying for that's inadequate for the risks that you're taking. So in essence, you're paying for insurance, but you don't have coverage, or you don't have proper coverage, and then you still wind up with a loss.
Okay, well, and I have personal experience with that because I had flown Lola out to outside somewhere and had to tether her down right when then a day later a hailstorm came through. So I had some hail damage, and I was just thinking, okay, you know, a little bit of work and paint and we're done. But when the estimates came in, they came in at about the price I paid for Lola. Well, I had insured Lola for just slightly more than that, so that was considered totaled by the insurance companies, even though the plane was fine. It was just cosmetic, if anything. So had I insured for a proper value, it wouldn't have been totaled, and there would have been more money to work with in that situation.
Correct. And on top of that, inside every insurance policy are stipulations and conditions. So one of those we'll just talk about, like for an example, is the fact that you need to have your medical and you have to have a biannual flight review. So let's say, for example, that you forget about your flight review. Well, now you're not a legal pilot, so you could have paying for insurance and actually not have any coverage for your loss if you're not in compliance. But actually what we see is we see inaccurate coverages all the time where you don't have proper pilots listed. Or you see things that are in violation of those conditions. Training requirements are a big deal. And for anybody now that's into pressurized aircraft, the new thing that the companies are doing is requiring annual training. Means even if you've had your airplane for 20 years and you've been successful flying it, and you're an airline pilot and you go through training all the time, they're wanting you to go through your manufacturer training school annually because you're flying. And if you don't go through that, and if you don't meet that stipulation, now you're paying for insurance and don't have proper coverage.
So are they doing that because of risk management?
What is going on is, again, when they're not making money, they have identified that the number one cause of loss, pilot error. That's not a secret.
Okay.
So then if you go one step farther, who is it that's more susceptible for pilot error? Well, what I see affected in the biggest two categories, any pilot over a 70 and any transition pilot. A transition is any time the aircraft exceeds your skill levels. So if you are getting into retracts for the first time and you don't have any retract, well, the pilot errors, people land with the wheels up. So what happens now is they don't like transition risks because it's a higher risk. So therefore, if they were hungry for new business, they would simply charge a premium to it, and then that's what they have done in the past. Now they're just denying it.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, 4 years ago when I purchased Lola, I had very little retract time, under 20 hours. And I went out and got a little bit to get over 20 because that's what they wanted, but it wasn't even in type. But they insured me. It was expensive, but they insured me. So what you're saying now is I know a lot of people, and I have a 210, that's Lola. So I know that a lot of people are having trouble getting insured on 210s because they're retract.
So with that, if the goal is to reduce pilot error, well, what's the answer for pilot error?
Training?
Training.
In that particular aircraft, I'm assuming.
Well, training in general. So the IFR rating now is the most important, and it's more important now than it ever has been. And so the additional training requirements, again, now the standard is that the carriers want to have an IFR rating for any retract complex aircraft across the board.
Wow.
So let's start with increasing your training so you have more training. And now then we talked about, you already said, in that particular aircraft. So make and model experience is also important. So there's only one carrier right now that's not requiring an IFR rating for complex aircraft. And you can guess it's more expensive than others. However, with that, so now I have my IFR rating, and now, but I want to go out and buy a retract, I want to go out and get a 210. Mm-hmm. The problem now is now you need to have experience in that particular aircraft.
Yeah, but I'm seeing that they're requiring, instead of 20 or 25 hours, they want 200. And that's just unreasonable for a lot of pilots.
Well, and on that same note, we're getting not just the increased in training requirements, but we're having more carriers just say no thank you.
Wow.
So now when you finally do have a carrier that's going to say, okay, our guess is that nobody else is going to write this, so we're really going to give you a high premium and we're give you high training requirements.
So what can be done for the person who wants to get into a 210 and wants to go buy it, and what can they do to get insured?
Well, so number one, make sure your ratings are there. Make sure you've got your IFR rating.
The IFR, okay.
Okay, and look at the whole ingredients to make a cake. You can't just take one of them out. So you're going to have your total flying hours. They're going to look at your total experience. They're going to look at your ratings. And then having retract time in any retract helps, because now you just have experience putting the wheels down. Now then, the last piece of it is going to be how much experience do you have in the same make and model. And it is very difficult when you're buying a 210 because it's not the most popular aircraft out there, and it is difficult finding training for that particular aircraft. So that's why we have worked hard to try to find those training solutions that are local and close by for the more rare aircraft. but at the end of the day, it's difficult.
You also specialize in renter's insurance for people. So kind of segueing, let's say that I wanted to rent Dan's 210 to build experience in it. I now need renter's insurance. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Or does my policy cover her?
Well, again, all the pilots are you're going to have to meet an open pilot warranty that's on every policy. And if you don't qualify under the open pilot warranty, so for your 210, it's going to say something like, all right, you got to have 500 hours total time. You have to have an IFR rating. You have to have at least 100 hours of retrack. And then you have to have at least 25 hours make and model.
Oh, wow.
So that would be a typical open pilot warranty. And with that, we're saying any pilot that has that criteria, they're pre-approved to fly the airplane.
Well, and I ran into that because Matt Wells has flown with me in Lola quite a bit, and I wanted to know from the insurance if Matt were to take my plane and fly, would he be covered? And I called them, and they said exactly that. But this was before the rates really jacked, so I was wondering if it has stayed the same. But based on his levels, he qualified under the warranty for the people, so he would be covered.
Sure.
So he would not need renter's insurance for my airplane.
Correct, because he has the ability to fly under your policy.
Right.
Now then, if someone does not qualify to the open pilot warranty, now then they could be added as a named pilot. So we would take all their flight experience and submit it to the underwriters for approval. If they come back and they say, well, we're just going to say no. This pilot is too far away from where we want them to be, so we're just going to say no thank you. Okay, so now there's not an option for them to be covered on your policy. So now that's where like a non-owned policy may come in. So a non-owned policy is completely opposite. So your aircraft insurance covers the aircraft, and the pilots that fly that aircraft are variable. A non-owned coverage is the exact opposite. It covers you as a pilot in any airplane that you would fly that's single engine land category up to 6 seats for your personal use. And so the airplanes you fly are now the variable. Well, but they don't have any different categories for high performance, retrack. It's all in the single engine land category. As long as it doesn't have more than 6 seats, it's covered under the non-owned coverage. Now, again, that's not as good as being named on your policy because there's limitations. A non-owned coverage is known as a negligence policy. It's liability. Well, if I'm not negligent, like a bird strike, that's not anybody's fault. Your insurance coverage isn't going to cover it because you got a pilot that they're not covering. And then your non-owned isn't going to cover it because you're not at fault.
Oh.
Oh, you have to be at fault. And when you say not owned, you mean, is that what we're calling renter's insurance?
The typical term for renters is a slang.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Non-owned coverage is the official term.
Okay.
So it covers you in an airplane you do not own.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
is the bird covered at this point then?
The bird is toast just like the pilot is.
Exactly. So what happens, you're saying then that you could be double covered in that situation and still have gaps or holes in the insurance coverage.
That's why it's important to know the limitations and the requirements for each different type of policy. So that's why, aviation insurance is a lot more difficult. You're seeing it in the price tag, but you're also feeling it in the requirements. And by the way, in the state of Texas, you're not required to have insurance on your airplane.
Okay. In some states you are?
There are a few states that I know that require liability insurance. But here in Texas, you're not required to have it. So therefore, there's no law that says you have to buy it, but there's also no skin in the game on the insurance companies that they have to provide it either. So the only way they're going to give you insurance is on their terms. And their attitude is, we don't care. If it's too high of a risk and we're not making money and we're not hungry for new business, we're negotiating with insurance companies that honestly aren't hungry. That's a tough negotiation.
Yeah. So what can we do?
What we can do is, number one, get yourself a good broker. That's really the number one. I find this every day. We get calls from all around the nation, and literally, there's a lot of insurance people that aren't aviators. And it's important because right now it's difficult. The other part about it is you need a broker that is really going to work with you and for you. So my whole, my rule is that if you don't know who your broker is by name, you don't have one. And you need one. And they need to be willing to look and help position you to the underwriters. So for an example, I get a phone call that somebody was wanting to use their airplane for instruction and rental. They wanted to buy an airplane for instruction and rental. Okay, well, the guy was a private pilot. So literally, he's asking the underwriters to give him instruction and rental coverage without a flight instructor. So had you known that the automatic answer to that is they can't tell you yes, they can't give you coverage for something where there's not a trained professional to be able to manage that. So because they didn't have a broker that really was on their game and proactive, they just submitted it to the underwriters and let them get declined across the board.
Oh, gee. And once you're declined, it's harder to go back and obtain insurance?
Correct, because remember, like for your airplane, you got a dozen of them.
Yeah.
And so now we're going directly to the same underwriters that said, well, I've already thrown this out. Why do I want to look at it again?
Got it. Okay. Is it okay to share your information with people out there that have questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. And just to clarify, you are also a pilot.
Yes. I grew up in the cockpit. I started flying airplanes when I was 16 years old.
Okay. So you're very intimately familiar with aviation as well as insurance. So you put those two together and we got you.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, and I'd like to, does anybody in our audience have aviation insurance questions, or just want to just rant angrily about the rates? So
The crowd goes wild.
The crowd goes wild. Well, we're keeping them back. Guard them? No, okay, no, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Julian, and currently a student pilot right now. And so I know flight schools out there have certain minimums as far as their insurance coverage in case of any incident was to occur. So I would ask from you, what's like a preferred coverage that you would tell a student pilot? I know variables are hours and just starting, but what would those numbers look like?
The answer to a student pilot, and actually that's a wonderful question because we get it every day. There's a lot of flight schools that don't require you to have non-owned coverage. But that doesn't mean that they release you from any responsibility damage you would do to their airplane. So now you could be taking a risk and having an exposure that you didn't know. And these renter policies, these non-owned coverages, they're very inexpensive for what they do. Let's say there's two parts of a non-owned coverage. One is a physical damage that covers the airplane. The other one is a liability that covers you. So what happens then is the most common loss is a simple prop strike. Well, we all know those airplanes aren't as cheap as they used to be. Your airplane's worth a lot more money now than it was when you bought it.
Yeah.
And the cost to fix it is a lot more than it used to be.
Oh, yeah.
So nowadays, a simple prop strike's 30 grand. So we don't recommend any non-owned coverage that's below a $30,000 limit for the aircraft. Now, your school may not require it at all. But let's say, for example, you have a prop strike. How fast is that school going to want to be to turn in that claim on their insurance? Especially if they just already had a prop strike.
Yeah, they're not going to want to.
Yeah, they don't want their airplane down. They're going to want to submit it.
Well, they're not going to want their rates to go up because they filed a claim.
Correct. And if you're turning in one or two claims over a claim every year, their premiums are really high.
Or they're just going to get denied altogether
Or they're
when they
gonna
go
get
to
denied.
renew. Okay.
And I'll tell you a story. As a student pilot, my school did not require non-owned insurance, renter's insurance. And there may have been a slight prop strike at one point, and everything was fine. A little bit of filing, and we were good to go, fortunately, but I had a sleepless night there because he told me, you might be in, $30,000, $40,000 in the hole here. And after that, I got renter's insurance.
Well, and not only that, but even if you don't carry insurance and you're at a flight school, their insurance company could come back after you, right? Through subrogation?
Correct. And that would be more on a really major at fault.
Right.
So what we see though is more typical is, again, just a simple little oops factor. The second coverage on your non-owned coverage is a liability. And people skip this because what do you think of risk when you go get in an airplane? You think of damaging somebody's airplane. That's really not the biggest risk you take. The biggest risk you take is doing something wrong and people sue you and your financial assets are at stake.
Okay.
That's where those $1 million liability policies that everybody kind of ignores or takes for granted on your insurance policy, that's really what's covering you. So when you're picking coverage for a non-owned coverage, that's what you should be looking at. So there's really only three choices: $250,000, $500,000, and $1 million. They're very simple. They're not expensive. And so a $30,000 whole value with a $500,000 liability is going to be maybe $400 for the whole year. And so it's not real expensive, but the companies that provide these coverages, and again, we talked about there's small world, 4 carriers provide non-owned coverage for the entire United States.
Wow. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Hi, thank you. So I'm on the board for a flying club that we have been trying to get off the ground, pun intended. And one of the issues that we keep running into is insurance. And it seems like because of the insurance limitations, the type of plane that we are looking at gets severely limited. So I'm curious if you have any advice for a flying club specifically outside of limit your members and have them all get their IFR rating that might make it easier for a new club to look at the insurance game a little bit easier.
Well, so on that, let's back up a little bit. Clubs have got the worst reputation in the insurance industry for having claims. So when you first come out of the gate, before you say anything, you say, I'm a flying club, already these insurance companies are not excited to see you. Number 2 then, so insurance, like I said, is difficult, but it's not impossible. So what happens now is, what type of an aircraft are you wanting to use in the club, and what are the qualifications from your pilots to be able to fly that? So what type of aircraft are you wanting to put in your club?
Well, basically a 182 type.
Okay, a 182 is going to have fixed gear, which is going to help you. And it's also got a great reputation in the insurance world, so those are all in your benefit. So now outside of that though, then having a good broker that's going to be able to help you position that correctly is important.
I could tell you that high performance aircraft in general, being the president of a flying club myself, high performance aircraft are much more expensive to insure. Because now you can carry more. It's a more, not that it's a complex, but it is a more complex aircraft to manage. So, and then it just depends too on your pilot group. If you've got a bunch of newbie pilots under a certain threshold of hours, these are all things that I've seen as far as insurance hurdles with our flying club.
And the hull value does come to play because a 182 is a more expensive aircraft. So there are certain, when you look at the full, all the ingredients put together, that's why it's a little more difficult. It's not impossible. We do it every day. It just means that you really need to have a broker that's going to really work harder for you.
All right, very good. I really appreciate, Chad, you coming on to the show.
Yeah, this has been very educational. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for watching. If you have aviation insurance questions, please leave them in the comments below. As always, like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.
In the hangar.